At 7:30 the night before my rehearsal dinner, a courier left a cream envelope at my Chicago apartment, and my name looked expensive enough to already feel like a threat. Inside was a letter from Grant Keller, my father in every legal sense that mattered, stating he would not walk me down the aisle without a witnessed DNA test. He had already booked the lab, signed the consent page, and clipped a copy of the guest email where he hinted my mother had fooled him for years quietly. When I emptied the envelope onto my kitchen counter, a smaller, folded note slipped from between the papers, and the handwriting looked nothing like his controlled block letters. It read, "He is wrong about the affair. Check the nursery bath ledger. 11:41, 11:52, and those 2 times landed in my chest harder than his threat had. I called Owen over from the drafting table, handed him the note, and by the time he reached, this isn't only about paternity. I was already reaching for my keys. Grant thought this was another stage-managed humiliation. One more chance to make me prove I belonged, before he performed fatherhood the next evening in front of 200 seated witnesses. I signed nothing that night, but I photographed every page, saved the metadata, and noticed the courier receipt listed Evanston, not the North Shore Country Club. By 8 o'clock, I understood exactly what had arrived at my door, not a demand for blood, but a hidden hand telling me my wedding had opened an old grave. By 10 the next morning, I was back at my parents' North Shore house for rehearsal brunch, carrying the note in my coat pocket like evidence nobody else could see. Grant moved through the dining room, greeting relatives and treating Owen with polished warmth that made his distance from me look respectable in front of everyone. When his eyes reached me, he only glanced at the envelope in my hand and asked whether I planned to cooperate before humiliating my mother tomorrow. That envelope pulled old scenes up faster than memory usually does, because Grant had used paperwork to mark me as other for most of my life. At 13, he refused to sign the form for a summer program and left it beside Brendan's hockey registration, telling Judith she has other blood somewhere to sponsor her ambitions. At 22, when I got into graduate school, he slid the tuition estimate back untouched and called me the one who never looked like us. Judith kept smoothing the linen napkin in her lap until the fabric folded into a tight white rope, and even Owen stopped pretending brunch was normal. Lorraine asked to see the note. Read the 2 times once, then crossed to the secretary desk and returned with a flat envelope she had kept for years. Inside were Judith's hospital wristband, a photocopied discharge summary, and Lorraine's pencil note that the delivery time in the records never matched what Judith remembered hearing. I stood with those papers spread between the coffee service and the fruit tray, and for the first time, the note felt exact. I was no longer deciding whether to take Grant's test, because that decision had already been made the second those bath ledger times appeared in ink. I would give him the DNA result he wanted, but only because the real answer was waiting somewhere behind those records, and I intended to drag it out. Owen refused to let me use the strip mall lab Grant had originally picked for humiliation, so by Monday afternoon, he had us booked at an accredited relationship testing clinic downtown. The receptionist checked our licenses, sealed each swab in front of us, and logged every signature, exact timestamp, and handoff until even Grant looked satisfied by the process. He sat across from me in the waiting room with the calm of a man who still believed procedure would finally turn his private suspicion into something official. Judith arrived 10 minutes later in the same navy coat from brunch and quietly set her purse beside me without looking at Grant once today. She had already signed the release for her own labor and delivery records from St. 12, Catherine's, because if the note named a bath ledger, that hospital mattered. Grant watched her initial each page and murmured, "Good," as if cooperation still somehow proved guilt. And that single word nearly sent me back out the glass doors. I stayed because every sealed envelope in that clinic felt cleaner than the years he had dragged through our house, and because strict chain of custody left less room for lies. The results arrived the next evening through a secure portal, and I opened them with Judith in Lorraine's sitting room while Owen shut the door and silenced his phone. The first line gave Grant exactly what he had demanded, a 0% parental match. But the second line turned Judith white before I understood what I was reading. My match to Judith was also 0, printed in the same careful language and the same merciless percentages, with no ambiguity anywhere on that bright screen at all. Judith covered her mouth, caught my wrist hard enough to hurt, and whispered, "I carried you for 9 months, so whatever happened, it did not happen at home." Grant was not in that room to argue or gloat, and because he wasn't, the note in my pocket changed. Bath ledger, 1141, 1152, and a mistake older than accusation. The number on the courier receipt rang twice before a woman with an old smoker's rasp asked whether I was alone and whether Grant had seen the note. I told her he knew about the DNA demand, not the Bath ledger, and she gave me a diner address near Evanston for noon. By the time I parked outside the diner, Judith had forwarded her hospital records confirmation, and that timestamp felt like permission to keep going. Sheila Moran was waiting in a back booth with a leather tote beside her and both hands around untouched, coffee gone cold. She studied the secure DNA report on my phone, then Judith's delivery summary, and nodded as if two loose ends had finally met. From the tote she removed a spiral shift log, a photocopied Bath ledger, and a notarized statement inside a plain manila folder. The ledger showed 2 infant girls bathed 11 minutes apart, and the initials beside one entry matched neither room assignment nor bracelet notation. Sheila put the statement between us, and the wording was blunt enough to stop my hand halfway to the coffee cup there. A new nurse returned the babies incorrectly. The error surfaced late, and administration chose silence instead of calling either family back that night. Owen had already connected us with a family lawyer, so from the parking lot we sent a preservation letter to Street, Catherine's risk office. Judith would pursue correction of her own medical records properly today, and anything involving birth documents would move only when the evidence was complete. That kept everything inside paper trails, sworn statements, hospital logs, and names that could still be made to answer for what happened. When I asked who the other baby had become, Sheila opened a smaller envelope and placed a printed profile photo beside my receipt. Madeline Pike, 31. Brown hair, brown eyes. Transit dispatcher. Born at Steint. Catherine's on the same night I was. 11 minutes apart. I slid the photo into my wallet beside the anonymous note, because Grant's cruelty finally had a larger shape and an earlier beginning now. I messaged Madeline Pike from the diner parking lot, then again that night, and once more the next morning with the shift log, the Bath ledger, and my DNA report attached. She left the first 2 unread, opened the third, and finally wrote back, "If this is a joke, it is a cruel one," and I understood why that was the only sane response. I sent photos of Judith's wristband, the delivery summary, and the ledger times, because those details had weight my words alone could never carry. We met after her shift at an all-night coffee shop near the commuter yard, where she kept both hands around a paper cup and never touched the muffin she bought. Madeline studied the notarized statement, then my face, then the printed profile Sheila had given me, and said people had always told her she looked like she belonged to someone else. Her family never turned that into a weapon, which made the room go still for a second, because I had no clean way to explain what Grant had done with doubt. She did not cry, reach for me, or call any of this fate, and that restraint made her feel more real than comfort would have. She wanted proof that could survive lawyers, hospitals, and the kind of polished denial men like Grant used when they thought money could outlast memory. By the time we left, she had agreed to test against both Grant and Judith through the same documented process that had already torn my life open. While we waited, Grant made everything worse in the exact way he always had when he felt righteous and unwatched. He sent another email to rehearsal guests, calling the delay unfortunate and hinting that I preferred drama to facts, as if the first report had closed the case. Owen read it once, set his phone down, and told me Grant was building his own stage without realizing the floor underneath it had already been cut. The second results came in 48 hours later, and this time the numbers did not hesitate anywhere. Madeline matched Grant at 99.99% and Judith at 99.98%, which meant the hospital had not stolen one child from one family, but split two lives cleanly at birth. I stared at those percentages until the digits blurred, then printed 3 copies, because rehearsal dinner was no longer his event to control. By 7 that evening, the private dining room was full of people who had read Grant's emails and arrived dressed for celebration, not correction. He moved through them with polished certainty, shaking hands and touching shoulders like a man about to have his instincts vindicated. I kept the printed reports inside a slim folder on my lap, while Owen waited near the projector and Judith stayed beside Lorraine quietly there. Grant rose before the first course cleared and tapped his glass, then thanked everyone for coming and called the night difficult but necessary for family truth. He pulled a folded copy of my original DNA report from his jacket and read the 0 paternal match line with satisfaction. Then he looked at Judith and asked how long she expected him to keep pretending this marriage had not been built on humiliation. I stood before he could continue and asked the server to lower the lights, because the screen behind him mattered more than his voice. Owen handed me the remote. The projector came alive, and the first slide showed my full report with the second line enlarged. I was not Grant's biological daughter, but I was not Judith's either. And that sentence emptied the room so fast, nobody moved. The next slide held the bath ledger, the copied entries, the crossed room numbers, and the 2 times from the note left at my door. After that came Sheila Moran's notarized statement, with her signature, seal, and the paragraph explaining how a new nurse returned 2 infant girls incorrectly. Sheila stood near the doorway long enough to confirm she had signed every word. And then Madeline Pike stepped inside before anyone could call it theory. Her report appeared last, clean and final, matching Grant at 99.99% and Judith at 99.98%, while her face made the numbers unnecessary. Grant gripped the back of his chair and kept repeating, "This cannot be right," even though every page before him came from the process he demanded. Judith crossed the room, took the microphone from his hand, and told him he would apologize to every person who received his lies. I did not ask Grant for remorse, forgiveness, or sudden character because the evidence had finished what words never could. I only told him that tomorrow Judith would walk me down the aisle, and that he would attend as a guest if he could manage silence. Nobody argued after that, because the file in my hand, the woman in the doorway, and the percentages on the screen had already rewritten the family in public. The next morning, Judith took my arm outside the church garden entrance, and the satin cuff at her wrist brushed the same hand that had signed her hospital release forms. She did not ask whether I was ready, because the answer had already been written the night before across a screen full of percentages. When the doors opened, she walked with me slowly and steadily, and every step replaced something Grant had spent 3 decades trying to withhold. Owen waited at the end of the aisle with the kind of face that asked for nothing except honesty, which was all I had left anyway. Lorraine sat in the front row with her program folded over the old instincts that had made her save paper when everyone else trusted memory. Madeline took the seat reserved for family, not close enough to fake intimacy, not far enough to pretend she had not been pulled into the center. Grant came, but he came without ceremony, without a role, and without the power to rename what had already been corrected in public. Just before the music changed, my phone lit with a message from Sheila Moran that read, "I should have done this years ago," and I slipped it back into my bag. By the time Owen reached for my hands, the order of my life had changed completely, because blood had explained the beginning. But love, evidence, and truth had decided who stayed. Thank you for staying with me through this story and holding space for the kind of truth that changes lives. I hope it leaves you believing peace can still arrive after doubt, loss, and long silence. Stay close for more stories about finding love. steadier ground, and moving forward again.